Please close the eyes and put your attention on the silence that's always there, deep in the mind. Connect with that deep inner silence. Become that silence. You are the silent witness. Now listen to the words of the Yoga Vasishta. Continuing with Book 5, Chapter 13, verse 28. Freedom from fear and desire, from exertions and action, together with wisdom and equanimity, are the inseparable accompaniments of ease and rest. The qualities of forbearance and feeling for our fellows, accompanied with contentment and good understanding, and joined with a mild disposition and gentle speech, are the indispensable companions of a wise man who rid himself of desires and his feelings of like or dislike. The mind running to meanness is to be repressed by restraining compassions and desire. Just like the current of water is stopped by its valve. Shun the sight of external things. They are the roots of error and fallacy. Always consider their internal properties, both when you are awake and asleep, and also when you are walking about or sitting down. Greedy men are caught like greedy fish in the hidden net of desire that are incapable of being satisfied. That net is woven with the threads of worldly cares and is under the waters of worldly affairs. Now, Ram, cut the meshes of this net with the knife of your good understanding and throw it in the water like a tempest, tearing black clouds apart and scattering them in the air. Try, O gentle Ram, to uproot the root of worldliness that sprouts forth in the weeds of vice. Use the hatchet of your perseverance and the eliminating shroud of your penetration. Employ your mind to cut down the cravings of your mind, like using an axe to cut down a tree. Then you will rest quietly as you arrive at the state of holiness. Having destroyed the former state of your mind by its present state, try not to forget them both in future by your heedless mind, and manage yourself unmindful of the world, and give up your reliance on it. Leave off your selfishness, O Ram, and rely upon the detachment of your soul. Lay hold of whatever offers itself to you, and without seeking for it, as the Lord God does everything and yet is aloof from everything. So must you do all acts outwardly without you mixing in anything. Knowing the knowable, one finds himself like the uncreated soul and a great Lord of all. But being apart from that soul, he sees only the material world spread before him. He who has the sight of the inner spirit, the silent witness, is free from thoughts of the external world and is not subject to joy or grief or sorrow or any other evil of life. He is called a yogi who is free from passions and hatred and looks on gold and rubbish in the same light. He is joined with his joy in his yoga and disjoined from all worldly desire. He enjoys the fruit of his own acts and mind, not what he wastes or gives away. He has the evenness of his mind in every condition and is unaltered by pain or pleasure. He is not plunged into any difficulty, who receives what he gets as it and is employed with whatever offers of itself to him, without considering the good or evil that he is to gain by it. He who is certain of the truth of the spiritual essence of the world yearns not for its physical enjoyments, but remains even-minded at all times. The dull mind follows the active intellect in accomplishing its objects, just as the carnivorous cat or fox follows a lion in search of meat scraps. As the servile band feeds on the flesh acquired by the lion's prowess, so the mind dwells upon visible and sensible objects which it perceives by power of the intellect. Thus the unsubstantial mind lives upon the outer world with the help of the intellect. But as it comes to remember its origin from consciousness, it recoils back to its original state. The mind, moved and lit by the heat and light of the lamp of consciousness, becomes extinct without its physical force and grows as motionless as a dead body. The nature of consciousness is known to exclude the idea of motion or pulsations from it. The scriptures call the power that has vibration, reasoning, or mind. The breathing or vibrations of the mind, like the hissing of a snake, is called its imagination. But by knowing consciousness as the self, the mind comes to the true knowledge of the inner soul. Consciousness, free from thoughts, is the everlasting Brahman. But joined with thought, it is called the imaginative principle, or the mind. The power of imagination, having assumed a definite form, is called the mind. The mind, with its will and its choices, is situated in the heart of living beings. With its two distinct powers of imagination and will, the mind is employed in the acts of discriminating and choosing the agreeable from what is disagreeable to it. Consciousness, being seated in the heart with its thoughts and wills, forgets its spiritual nature and remains as a dull material substance. The intellect, being thus confined in the hearts of all animals in this world, continues its utter oblivion of its nature until it is awakened of itself, either by its intuition or the instruction of teachers or otherwise. The intellect is awakened by instruction from the scriptures and teachers, by the practice of dispassion, and by subjugation of the organs of sense and action. When the minds of living beings are awakened by learning and self-control, they tend towards the knowledge of the great Brahman. Or else they wander at random about the wide world. We must therefore awaken our minds that are dormant to divine knowledge. Rolling in the pit of worldliness from intoxication of the wine of error. As long as the mind is not awakened, it is unconscious of everything, though it perceives what can be perceived. Yet this perception is as false as the sight of a city in our fancy. But when the mind is awakened by divine knowledge to the sight of the Supreme Being, it presents everything in itself, just as the inner fragrance of flowers also pervades the outer petals. Though consciousness has a quality of knowing everything, contained in all the three worlds, yet it has only little knowledge of them, because of its insufficient desire to know them. The mind, without intellect, is a dull block of stone. But it is opened by divine light, like the lotus bud opening under sunlight. The mind that imagines is as devoid of understanding as a statue made of marble, is unable to move about by itself. How can regiments drawn in a painting wage a war? How can moonbeams make medicinal plants emit their light? Who has seen dead bodies smeared with blood running about on the ground? Who has witnessed stone fragments singing musical choruses in the woods? Or does the stone idol of the sun dispel the darkness of the night? And where does an imaginary forest of sky spread its shade on the ground? Of what good are the efforts of men who are as ignorant as blocks of stone, and who are led by their error in many ways, other than to endanger themselves by the mirage of their minds? Imagination displays the non-existent as existent in the soul, just as sunbeams show clear oceans in desert sands. The learned sage call the moving principle in the body the mind. They know it is a mere force of the winds, like the vital breath of living beings. Those whose self-consciousness is not disturbed by the currents of their passions and desires have their spiritual souls like an unperturbed stream. But when this pure consciousness is fouled by false fantasies of this and that this is I and that is mine, then the soul and the vital principle are both taken together to form a living being. The mind, the living soul, and understanding are all only fictitious names of an unreality according to the conception of false thinkers, and not of them who know the true spirit. In reality, there is no mind, no understanding, no thinking principle, and no body. There is only the reality of the one universal spirit, which is ever existent everywhere. The one universal spirit is the soul, which is all this world. It is time in all its fluctuations. It is more transparent than the atmosphere, and it is clear because it is nothing at all. It is not always apparent, owing to its transparency, yet it is ever existent because of our consciousness of it. The spirit is beyond all things, and is perceived by our inner perception. The mind vanishes into nothing before our consciousness of the Supreme Soul, just as darkness is dispelled from where the sun shines. When the transparent and self-conscious soul raises other figures of its own will, then the presence of the soul is forgotten and lays hidden under the grosser creations of the mind. The faculty of the Supreme Spirit that wills is labeled the mind. It is detachment and lack of our own will that produces our liberation. Such is the origin of the mind, which is the root of creation. Will is a faculty of our consciousness, otherwise called the soul. Intellectual essence, after falling from its state of detachment and being defiled by its desires, becomes the principle of production or producing desired objects. The mind becomes extinct through loss of vital power, just as the shadow of a thing disappears by removing the substance. The living body perceives in its heart the notion of a distant place that exists in the mind. This proves the identity of the vital breath and the thinking mind. Therefore, by repressing the mind, the vital breath is also repressed, which produces longevity in health. Stone has the capability of mobility and fuel of inflammability, but vital breath and mind do not have powers of vibration or thinking without the force of the intellect and the spirit. The breath of life itself is inert, and its pulsation is the effect and composed of the surrounding air. So the action of the mind is due to the force of consciousness, whose transparency pervades all nature. The mind is the union of intellectual and vibrating powers. In production, it's as false as the falsity of knowledge. Mental power is called error and also illusion. And these, in ignorance of the Supreme Brahman, produce the knowledge of this poisonous world. Now let us continue established as the silent witness and perform the Trimana Sanyama technique on the esoteric Mahamantra, balancing all the karmic traces that have arisen during today's reading of the Yoga Vasishta. Jai Gurudev.